Hey everyone, hope you're doing okay today. I am in my apartment and there is rain and thunder outside, so if you hear anything in the background, it's just the heavens opening up. So let's try these out today. We're going to be doing transitions from Bluebook Test 1. So these are questions toward the back half of each reading and writing section. In it, you have to fill in the transition. And it's really testing if you understand not just what the transition words are, right, which I think most people know most transition words. It's really testing, do you know how to do connections in the sentences, right? How does one part of a sentence connect, right? How does one sentence connect to the other sentence, right? So it's about structuring an argument or structuring a paragraph. So we'll do these. I'll give you tips and pointers, and then, as always, you can leave questions and comments in the comments. So this is question 22 from Bluebook Test 1, Module 1. One poll taken after the 1960 presidential debate suggested that John Kennedy lost badly. Only 21% of those who listened on the radio rated him the winner. Period. Blank, the debate was ultimately considered a victory for the telegenic young senator who rated higher than his opponent, Vice President Richard Nixon, among those watching on the new medium of television. Okay. So we have here, we have the debate was ultimately considered a victory, right? So we have a setup where he did poorly, but then at the debate, but then he did well in the debate, right? So that is suggesting that there's a switch. You often want to think about how one sentence goes to the next. And one way is like, is it building off of it or is it pivoting from it, right? So if it's building off of it, you would say like similarly or therefore or in other words, right? Or likewise. But if it's pivoting, you could use however or some other pivot word like nevertheless, right? So one poll taken after the 1960 presidential debate suggested that John Kennedy lost badly. Only 21% of those who listened on the radio rated him the winner. Nevertheless, the debate was ultimately considered a victory for the telegenic young senator who rated higher than his opponent. Okay, so we said likewise, that would be like they have the same meaning, right? So that doesn't work. Same with in other words. And then therefore would be like if he did badly, then therefore he lost the election, which isn't true, right? So it's nevertheless. All right, so you see how there's a pivot from the first part, which said he lost badly, to the part that says it was ultimately considered a victory. That is going to be a help to you. All right, so now we'll try the next one. So 23. In November 1934, Amrit Sher Gill was living in what must have seemed like the ideal city for a young artist, Paris. She was studying firsthand the color-saturated style of France's modernist masters and beginning to make a name for herself as a painter. Blank Sher Gill longed to return to her childhood home of India. Only there, she believed, could her art truly flourish. And then we have as choices for which choice completes the text: A, still; B, therefore; C, indeed; D, furthermore. So in this one, right, we have an artist living in Paris. That sounds nice. And then we are told that it gives you a great way to live, right? She was studying it firsthand, and it would seem like an ideal city. So it's all looking great for her. But she longed to return, right? And the fact that I said but, right, you can use that word yourself because that's one that we often use and you're familiar with. But she longed to return, so you could fill it in with but, and then which of these goes with but? Therefore is like building off of again, right? Indeed is emphasizing, and furthermore is the same as building off of. And honestly, seeing these two together lets you know this is probably not correct because they're so close. How would you choose? But still is suggesting a pivot, right? It's saying still she longed to return home. Like there's still some issue going on. It's not all daffodils and daisies or however you say it, right? So now we'll go to the next one. In his 1925 book, The Morphology of Landscape. U.S. geographer Carl Sauer challenged prevailing views about how natural landscapes influenced human cultures. Blank. Sauer argued that instead of being shaped entirely by their natural surroundings, cultures play an active role in their own development by virtue of their interaction with the environment. Okay. So then he challenged prevailing views, right? Okay. Maybe you heard that thunder right there. That's dramatic. I don't know if this question lives up to that, but we'll try. And he argued instead, right? So he challenges this, argued that instead of being, okay, so this one is more that instead of being shaped entirely by natural surroundings, cultures play an active role in their own development, right? Okay, great. So we're going from a general argument here, right? But we don't have real details. He just challenged the prevailing views. We don't know what they are. But then here we get a specific thing about how he's arguing against being shaped entirely by the natural surroundings. And this sets it up, right? So finally, there's no finality to it. Therefore, again, this isn't explaining the first part. Then we have similarly and specifically. They're not comparing. So the first part isn't like the second part. The first part's just more general than the second part. So it should be D, right? Specifically is like you're narrowing down the argument. Okay? So that would be our best choice here. And now we can go to 25. Although those who migrated to California in 1849 dreamed of finding gold nuggets in stream beds, the state's richest deposits were buried deeply in rock, beyond the reach of individual prospectors, period. Blank. By 1852, many had given up their fortune-hunting dreams and gone to work for one of the large companies capable of managing California's complex mining operations. Okay. So let's see what the first part is telling us, right? They dreamed of finding gold, were buried deeply beyond the reach. Okay. Period. Blank. By 1852, many had given up. Okay. And then we have an although, right? Although. That's an important part. I need transition words. You gotta love them because they are the keys to so many of these questions, right? So although they dreamed of this, so we already have a pivot in the first sentence. We're going from although they had these great dreams of finding gold, right? Of being a 49er. There was this trouble that they were buried deeply in the rock beyond the reach of individual prospectors. And then the second sentence, right, continues off the second part of the first sentence by saying the fortune dreams had given up those dreams that we heard about in the first part and gone to work. So it's like because the state's richest deposits were buried deeply in rock, they left. So if we look at the answer choices, right, furthermore is like adding another example. We don't have an example yet, so it wouldn't be that one. Still, we used already, right? It's kind of like a but or a pivot. And then we have consequently and next. Next is like you're ordering up a series of events. There's no event in the first one. It's just stating a situation. And that situation leads to the second part, right? So the second part's a consequence of it, so we go with consequently. Okay. And now we'll try 24 from Module 2A, right? From Bluebook Test 1. In 1968, U.S. Congressman John Conyers introduced a bill to establish a national holiday in honor of Martin Luther King, Jr. The bill didn't make it to a vote, but Conyers was determined. He teamed up with Shirley Chisholm, the first black woman to be elected to Congress, and they resubmitted the bill every session for the next 15 years, period. Blank. In 1983, the bill passed. Okay, so here again, I love learning these random facts. Like, I never heard about John Conyers. I mean, I know about Martin Luther King Day, and yeah, that's nice. He teamed up with Shirley Chisholm. I feel like I know her name, but alas, I have to focus on these question choices. So we have instead, likewise, finally, and additionally, right? So what's the scenario here? What's going on, right? Is it they're leading to something and then instead something else happens? Is it that something happens and then something like it happens? Is it that they've been working towards something and then finally it happens? Or is it that stuff's been happening and then one other thing's been happening, right? That's sort of a very blunt way of thinking of these. The bill didn't make it to a vote the first time, but he was determined. Okay, so there's some sort of like momentum going on here. And then they resubmitted the bill every session for the next 15 years. Okay, a lot of determination. And that sets up the question, right? So then in 1983, the bill passed, and that's sort of the end. They got what they wanted. So if you look at this, right, finally makes the most sense, right? Not likewise, not instead, and not additionally. Great. So 25, most conifers, trees belonging to the phylum Coniferophyta, are evergreen. That I think I did know. That is, they keep their green leaves or needles year-round. However, not all conifer species are evergreen. Okay, because they said most, right? Period. Large trees, comma, blank, lose their needles every fall. So a transition doesn't always have to come at the very beginning of a sentence, right? But it's still about how this sentence, right, connects to the sentences before it. So large trees, blank, lose their needles every fall. Okay. So they tell us something that happens. They use a nice one, right? However, that's its own transition. Not all conifer species are evergreen. Large trees, and then they give us an example. Okay, so an example. Let's look at the choices. For instance, okay, I'm liking that one. Nevertheless, that's a pivot. So it'd be like, nevertheless, large trees keep their leaves. That wouldn't really work. And here they lose their leaves, so it doesn't really work. Meanwhile, there's not like two things happening at once. And in addition, we don't have a first example. So how are we going to have an in addition? In addition to what, right? So it's for instance. For instance, large trees lose their needles every fall. Okay. And now we'll go to 26. Samuel Coleridge Taylor was a prominent classical music composer from England who toured the U.S. 3 times in the early 1900s. The child of a West African father and an English mother, Coleridge Taylor emphasized his mixed race ancestry. For example, see, just like for instance, for example, he referred to himself as Anglo-African, blank. He incorporated the sounds of traditional African music into his classical music compositions. Okay. So the child, he emphasized his mixed race ancestry. Okay, that's sort of the beginning of this narrative happening. And then he referred to himself as Anglo-African, and he incorporated the sounds of traditional African music into his classical musical compositions. Okay, so now let's look at these choices. In addition, okay, actually, however, and regardless. So I feel like actually, however, and regardless, they all set up pivots, right? But there's not a pivot here, it's building off of it. It's still going with the first part. He referred to himself as Anglo-African, and his music incorporated both those things. So it's, if you're using and in addition would be a great choice for that. Okay, so see, you can often make your own ones like but or and, simple ones that we use in everyday language, and then try to find the more formal one or maybe more abstruse or one here that would go there. Okay, so this would be in addition. I don't think abstruse is the right word. I'm blanking on the right word, but let's go to 23, right, which is in Module 2B. Earth's auroras, colorful displays of light seen above the northern and southern poles, result, broadly speaking, from the sun's activity. See, another great fact. Blank. The sun releases charged particles that are captured by Earth's magnetic field and channeled toward the poles. These particles then collide with atoms in the atmosphere, causing the atoms to emit auroral light. Okay, great. A is specifically, B is similarly, C is nevertheless, and D is hence. So specifically, again, right, you have one thing and then you narrow it down. Then you have similarly is like when you're comparing two things that are alike. Nevertheless is a pivot, and hence is like thus. It's like when the second part explains it, right? So the first part is just telling us in general, broadly speaking, right? That's kind of a nice little clue from the sun's activity. And then we're told what sun activity helps it, right? They release charged particles that are captured by Earth's magnetic field and channeled toward the poles. Okay, so then it's not similarly because there's not two things being compared. It's not nevertheless because it's not a pivot, it's just explaining the general concept that the first part mentioned. And it's not hence because it's not giving a reason for the first part. It's specifically, right, which we already had before. It's showing in detail how the first part works, right? Broadly speaking, it's from the sun's activity. Specifically, it's because of these things that the sun does. All right, and now we'll do 24. Some members of the U.S. Supreme Court have resisted calls to televise the court's oral arguments, concerned that the participants would be tempted to perform for the cameras and thus lower the quality of the discourse. The justices worried that most viewers would not even watch the full deliberations, only short clips that could be misinterpreted and mischaracterized. Which choice completes the text with the most logical transition? However, additionally, in comparison, for example. Okay, so if there's a pivot, we would probably go with however, right? If it's an example, for example. In comparison, as you're comparing two things, and additionally, our old friend, you're building off of, right? It's like in addition. Some members have resisted calls. However, the justices worry, no. So the justices worry that most viewers would not even watch the full deliberations, only short clips that could be misinterpreted. So this is a new concern, right? The first concern was that people would perform, and the second part is no one's even going to watch, so why go to the trouble? But they're both about concerns, so it wouldn't be in comparison because you're not really comparing them. And it's not an example of the first issue, and it's not a pivot. So we got additionally. All right, and now we'll go to the last one. Drum roll, thunder roll, whatever you want to do. The more diverse and wide-ranging an animal's behaviors, the larger and more energy-demanding the animal's brains tend to be. Period. Blank, from an evolutionary perspective, animals that perform only basic actions should allocate fewer resources to growing and maintaining brain tissue. The specialized subtypes of ants within colonies provide an opportunity to explore this hypothesis. So we have subsequently, which is like after this thing, this other thing happens. Besides, which is like another example. Nevertheless, which is a pivot. And thus, when the second part explains the first part. So let's go back, right? The more diverse and wide-ranging an animal's behavior, the larger and more energy-demanding the animal's brains tend to be. From an evolutionary perspective, animals that perform only basic actions should allocate fewer resources. Okay. So then thus, right, is when the first part explains the second part. So the specialized subtypes of ant colonies will then provide an opportunity to explore this hypothesis. We don't need to worry about the sentence very much because that's not even attached to the two sentences where the pivot happens, right? You want to remember to focus on what needs to be focused on. There's not a pivot, so it's not nevertheless or besides. And then it's not like because this happens, or like it's not like after this happens, another thing happens, right? With subsequently. It has to be then thus, which makes sense because the first part says you're doing this, thus this is happening, right? So the first part explains the second part. All right, so I hope this video helped you all, and I will see you all soon. I'm going to keep doing these reading and writing ones. Remember the basics here, right? Fill in the blank with ones you already know in your head, and then find choices that go with the ones you already know. Think about if the sentence is pivoting, if it's building off of itself, if it's getting more specific, if it's giving an example, right? And that will really help. And try to eliminate options as you go. And that should really simplify these questions. I know people can struggle with these. They feel very vague on like your strategy, but I'll make more videos about this. And as always, if you have questions or anything, put them in the comments. And if you like this video and want more, like and subscribe. Bye.